Hello, everybody. I had recently put up a video, it was a few weeks ago, kind of discussing whether or not Legion is any good or not. And I think that's a really important thing to start talking about because at the at the launch, people were really excited for the game. But how are people feeling now? And I said this at the end of that video, like, the game is good, but how good will it be in 3 weeks, in 4 weeks? That's kind of the determining factor, because even Warlords of Draenor, which was apparently well received at the very start, the player base fell off very quickly and started to hate the game after just a couple weeks because they realized there was no content there. So does Legion have the content to hold it up? Have they, succeeded on their promise of giving the content? And now that Mythic Plus and Raids have released, how is the game? It's kind of time for a checkup, a status update, a state of the game, you might, say. But at the same time, I should also mention that they have promised content in the future, and we're going to get into promises and how that typically does not work out. But what you see in the background is me doing a Mythic Plus dungeon. It's with just a random group of people. We're doing Mythic Plus 4, which means that it gets its first affix, which, if you played Diablo, you're familiar with that. In fact, if you played Diablo, you're familiar with Mythic Plus dungeons, because it is literally a greater rift. But what ends up happening is I got together with this random group of people, and we did really well, and we barely beat this dungeon, like barely beat it. And then we tried to do a 5, and we almost got that one too, but we were just a few seconds off. So that one stung a bit more. But the idea here is, just as a refresher for those of you who don't know, is you have this dungeon that is, I guess, infinitely scaling. So you have mythic dungeons, which you could just go do, and those are on a lockout. But when you do one of those at the beginning of the week, or once during that week, or that lockout that you do them, you're going to get a Mythic Plus keystone. And it starts at a low level. When you get into a mythic dungeon, you plop that keystone in, there'll be a countdown, it starts, and then you go. And it'll tell you, things are 8% harder hitting, they do 8% more damage, and they have 8% more HP, and then that goes up, 17% more HP, and 17% more damage, and it just keeps giving you more and more of that, so it scales, constantly the higher of a Mythic Plus dungeon you're doing. And when you finish one within a time limit, because there is a time limit, you get your keystone upgraded, and then that's how you get to the next level. It's almost like the old versions of Greater Rifts in Diablo, before they got rid of Greater Rift keystones. Like, before you had to upgrade your keystone and keep going that way. That's actually how the Mythic Plus works, is you have this keystone and you upgrade it, and then that's how you get into the next ones. But once you get to certain levels, so like at level 4, for example, you get your first affix, which is basically just a modifier on the dungeon. So the one that we have is bolstering, and you could see the little like man yelling icon on the right hand side there near the countdown, the timers. And what is happening with bolstering is anytime a trash mob dies next to another trash mob, the ones around it gain 20% HP and 20% damage done, and that stacks. So when you pull large groups of enemies, you don't want to be doing that, because it's just going to keep buffing them. Instead, you want to pull small groups of enemies and kill them as quickly as possible all together, and that tends to be the best way to take care of bolstering. But there's, other ones as well that modify the dungeon, and I think it's a really cool idea. It's a really cool concept. It gives you replayability in the fact that these dungeons that may seem pretty stale before now suddenly have a whole new challenge to them. And it also fixes that issue of difficulty that MMOs tend to run into, where a game seems like it's going to be fairly difficult, it comes out, things get nerfed, and then it's really easy, and then the challenge isn't there anymore, and it's no longer fun to play. This has happened with Cataclysm. Is actually a really good example of this. It's not necessarily the best example, but it is a good example of when the dungeons were first released, and you had to go in there, and everybody wasn't geared, and you had to CC everything, and Dead Mines was impossible to do. It was fun. in that time. But when you think about it, it was just a few months after that whole process, they went back and they nerfed a ton of stuff. And then suddenly everybody was back to just pulling the entire instance and AOing it down. Like, that's not fun to me. I like having the challenge and having to pay attention and, be able to actually have to do mechanics on bosses and stuff like that. And Mythic Plus is a good way around that whole thing. And sure, you're not necessarily getting new dungeons that are more challenging, constantly throughout the expansion. We'll see if they can hold up with some of the promises they've given us. But what basically it boils down to is right now, the entire thing is really fun because we have these dungeons that would get stale already and people may not have ever done again after those first few weeks, and now we're in them and we're doing them and we're getting loot that is equivalent for what we are doing. We're getting really good loot out of it, so it feels rewarding as well. So that's the whole Mythic Plus idea. Well, now they've also released the Emerald Nightmare, and we went in very casually this week as a guild and did it. We got to the last two bosses, so Cenarius and Xavius, and it's fun. It's actually, there's nothing in there that's super interesting as far as mechanics. That being said, I haven't done Cenarius or Xavius, so I don't think that there's anything to write home about in there. It's not beautifully designed like some raids I've done in the past, not necessarily in WoW, but in other games, but it is still a good raid. And with that said, it does have some things in there that had got me really nostalgic. There is a fight, which is, it's the Nightmare Dragons, the Dragons of the Nightmare, or whatever they call them, where it's the dragons that I fought in vanilla, the world's dragons. It's your Sonder and Emrys. It's like all of them as a single fight, where like dragons are swapping out and stuff. It's really cool, and I really liked that. And even in their room, it has a little bit of nostalgia in there because there's the portals to the other zones that those dragons would spawn in. So there's like a portal to Ashenvale, there's a portal to Duskwood, and then a portal to Fel. Like, it's good. It's really good, and I am the first to admit that the nostalgia is what got me there, and kind of was like, that's really cool. But, there's also some just pretty standard raid mechanics in there that aren't too crazy and are kind of fun and are unique for the thing. But I think the most important part of it is that it matches the theme. You're in the Emerald Nightmare. We have been wanting to go to the Emerald Dream or the Emerald Nightmare, whatever you want. I would prefer to go to the Dream for years now, and now we get to go in there as a raid, and it's really cool. I really like it. But we went in as 10 people, and we did it on normal. We're not trying to go for server firsts here, although we probably could. And we're just casually going in there and having fun. To give you an example, we went in and we one-shot the first boss, and it was awesome. It was actually a lot of fun. I wasn't expecting that. I think that's a little too easy. And then we proceeded to wipe for 2.5 hours on Ursoc because we just didn't have the DPS, because we had to pull in a couple pugs, and the people we had were under geared because not all of us have a ton of time to play. So it was fun though. Like those 2.5 hours, while sometimes frustrating because you're like, crap, we've been in here and we haven't made any progress since one-shotting the first boss. And now you're in there and you're just kind of learning together, and I think it's fun. And then we went in on a second night and we did pretty much the rest of the raid fairly easily. We killed Ursoc within a couple attempts. We had the DPS to do it. That was kind of a big part of it. And then we went in and did the other fights, and pretty much just without knowing what they were doing, like we looked at the dungeon journal. I had briefly looked up some things beforehand about what the fights did, and then we just went in and did them and learned them together, and kind of like had a few wipes where we're like, we should probably change that around. So yeah, that's a good idea. So we did that, and then we killed an extra few bosses, and now we have 2 left to do on the second week, and that's further than most guilds will get. I would prefer clearing it out entirely on heroic the first week, but I don't think that that's realistic in our state. Our players just don't have that kind of time, and I'm totally one of those. I don't have the time to really push into Mythic raiding and trying to get server first anymore, but maybe one day I will. I don't know. But I do remember saying a couple years ago that Wildstar was probably going to be like my last hurrah of raiding. And to some degree it was, because I had gone several years without doing it. I kind of abandoned MMOs almost entirely. I went and played some that were really fun that I could do casually and just enjoy myself. Like Skyforge is a good example of that. And I was just, not doing this, but coming back to this and having a lot of fun with it and seeing that this expansion is actually really good and provides me with a lot of content that is desirable to me has been really cool. And I think that is a huge part of me now looking back on the last month of this game, how it launched and what content we currently have and all that, and going, no, I do fully believe that this is actually a good expansion. The content has kept me playing. You're not going to believe this. I hate daily quests. I know, crazy. But here's even the more unbelievable thing. I'm jumping on every day. I have a process. I get up in the morning. I go and get coffee. I go pee. I get my coffee because then it's done brewing. I sit down. I log into my characters and I do 2 sets of world quests. So I do basically 4 world quests on my demon hunter, 4 on my shaman, and I would do them on my druid, but I haven't really been enjoying the druid, to be honest. They kind of killed that class for me, unfortunately. But, I do them on my 2 other characters, and I really enjoy them. And then sometimes I go and do a couple other things that, I could do within a few minutes, and then I log out, and I go get work done, and then I come back that night, and I go play with everybody else. And it's been fun. Like, I'm actually logging in every day. There's content for me to do, and I feel like I'm nowhere close to being done with the amount of content that's in the game. We have the raids that just came out. We're having a lot of fun doing Mythic Plus and trying to progress through those, and those have been really rewarding when you're able to get the group together to do them. And I really appreciate that, because you no longer have to get 10 people together to get fulfilling content like you had to before, to just like raid at the basic level. Now you can get 5 people together and go do these crazy difficult dungeons, and it's a lot of fun. And you're learning a lot from it too, and I think that's part of it. And you're being rewarded too, of the same quality of loot that Mythic level raiding will get you. Not necessarily in the amount of quantities that Mythic level raiding will get you, but you are getting upgrades and stuff like that too. So it's fun. So is the game good after a month? Yes, I do believe it is. I believe it's probably their best expansion. Now, why I say probably, not certainly, is because we need to talk about the whole next problem here, which is that of promises. Because it looked like Warlords of Draenor was going to be a really good expansion. There was some good design there. Like the whole phasing technology that they've used for questing and stuff back then, and how the story was told through leveling up, and the leveling up process was really, really good. And then they elaborated on that with Legion, but there was some good stuff in Warlords. It was just void of content once you hit max level. And then over the past, couple of years of that game being out, there were huge content droughts. And there were times it was like a year before. And okay, if you played SWTOR, you can totally sympathize with this, but there was an entire year there where they had 1 tier of rating. And, that's not okay. And the excuse that Blizzard gives is a valid one, which is, hey, we were actually expecting Legion to come out a lot sooner, but there were a lot of really cool things that we wanted to do with it, so we took our time with it. It's like, okay, I can see that. But the people playing Warlords were almost punished for doing so at that rate. And we haven't just seen this with WoW. We've seen this in the past. The games that I've played on the channel, like look at SWTOR, for example. They said, we want to have a huge focus on the end game and the raiding, and have the story be a part of that. and they came out with Vault of Eternity, and it was really good. Some of the fights in there were well designed, and it was awesome and fun, and it was a cool initial raid. And then they came out with the Palace, and then that one was cool. And then we started seeing the chinks in their armor when they came out with what's that stupid one with the one with the tentacles. I know that sounds so weird, but you know which raid I'm talking about. Terror from Beyond. There we go. Once they came out with that, which by the way was their best raid, and then we got nothing, and then we got more of nothing, and then the expansion came out, and you know what we got? The exact same raid scaled up. That was that moment when everybody realized, like, ah, crap, you guys lost way too much of your end game team to keep this up anymore. And what they did was pretty smart. They just have transitioned into doing only story content now with the Knights of the Fallen Empire, and now the one that's coming after that. So, like, they've done what they should have done initially and just not had any raids at all, because why lead people on you know, having end game content like that if you're not going to have it? So they just stopped making raids. Let's be honest, like, that is all gone in Star Wars now. And so where I went after that to get that end game fix, because that's what I wanted to do, was I went and played WildStar, which is a game based around difficult content. And even the systems in the game are built around having that difficult content, because instead of just having a random spell effect on the ground that you can barely see, I'm looking at you, WoW, like, there's some spell effects that just are so obscure and you can't see them because it's like purple on purple, and you're like, really? Like that? I can't see that. Most people can't see that. WildStar had a good solution with their telegraph system. You know, there was this big thing on the ground that you could see allies casting and enemies casting, and then you could do really fun things with that. You know, like some enemy abilities put a giant checkerboard on the ground of this telegraph, and you had to stand in like a tiny little hole of it, and then it started rotating, and you're like, oh gosh, like, this is amazing, because you can have mechanics built around that kind of idea. And it allowed content to be excessively difficult, because at that point the only thing wiping you was your own inability to do it, to actually follow the mechanics, because it was so clearly laid out for you and so fairly laid out that if you couldn't do it, you just couldn't do it, and you had to work at it. And I really liked that. And in fact, the raids in WildStar are the best raids I've ever done. I had gotten into Datascape. I did play, you know, some of the raids in Datascape. I did Genetic Archives. You know, that stuff was fun, and there was some really cool ideas and concepts in there, albeit it was their first ever game as a company, you know, with Carbine. So there were some janky things, sure, but the design of the raids were really, really good, and the fights were a lot of fun, and they were very difficult. Were they too difficult? Maybe. But if you were into raiding that much, they were perfect. And I can say that out of experience. They were so much fun. But then everybody stopped playing WildStar. It's free to play now. There's actually a lot of people playing, and I would suggest hopping in. They have several raids out. But what ended up happening is that game launched, and this goes back to our promise of content. That game launched, and they wanted to fix a ton of stuff. And by doing so, they did the right call. They pulled back this huge... They had a year of content planned, a lot of it already developed and made, and they held it back. Was that a mistake? Maybe, but I think it was probably the best thing they could have done, because there were a lot of bugs in the end game. And when they fixed it, they had all this content that they could put out. Now they have all these additional raids and that are a part of that, and dungeons, and it's just everything with that. But what ended up happening is then they switched to free-to-play, which meant that all of that content that they had planned kind of went out the window as far as release schedule, because they wanted every few months, like, a new thing to come out that you would want to be doing, and every month to have new content for you every month. And that's a crazy release schedule, but they had it planned out, and they could have done it had things gone slightly differently. But the moral of the story is they promised content, and didn't deliver on it. So again, we're seeing another company want to give content, but just not being able to turn it over that quickly. Because an MMO is a crazy beast. There's a lot of moving wheels and cogs and stuff. And if you don't do it thoroughly, you're going to have a lot of broken stuff and a lot of exploitable stuff. And Blizzard has been in this game for quite some time. And because of that, they kind of understand that now. So how are they going about their promises they've given to us in Legion? Well, first and foremost, what are the promises? Well, the first is that they're going to have a much more extensive release schedule, and that they've thrown out the idea of yearly expansions. They are already working on the next expansion, as they would be, because an expansion does take a lot of time to make. But they are focused. Their end game team is focused on making the content for this expansion. And that is relieving to hear, because you look back at Warlords of Draenor, you look back at, things like Wildstar and stuff, and their end game team was focused on stuff way too far in the future. The stuff that was already out and the stuff that was nearing coming out was just so broken to begin with, because they weren't working on it anymore. They weren't iterating on it. They were too far out, and the iterations that could happen were just not good enough. So with this, what they want to do is every few months have something out. And doesn't that sound familiar? Every few months have new content come out. But so far they've delivered. Not in the fact that every few months something has come out, because the game hasn't been out that long, but they are giving us the Mythic dungeon for Karazhan, and they're giving us a kind of intermediary, thank you, like dungeon raid thing. It is a raid, but it's kind of weird because it's not a full raid, but basically it's going into Helia's land and stuff, and that's all already on the PTR. They've already been testing that. There's guilds in there trying it out. Sure, Mythic is released and people are more focused on that at the moment, but that content is on there to do, and they're testing it already, because in a couple months, that stuff is out, and now we have more content to do. Suddenly we can do Mythic plus Karazhan, which sounds like a lot of fun, or Mythic Karazhan. I'm pretty sure they're going to have a Mythic plus with it, if I recall correctly. But you can do, either or. You could go in there just to see how they changed it for nostalgia's sake, or you can go in there to actually do it and try to get loot out of it. And then they have this, in-between raid coming out. So now raiders have something to do, something to look forward to, and something to work at. And then you have this leaderboard of the Mythic Plus stuff as well that you can push if you're in that upper echelon of content. And then a couple months after that, we're getting the next one, which is the Suramar raid. So the Nighthold, I think it's called, where it's in the city of Suramar, which we've already been doing. By the way, I do want to talk about Suramar, and we will in a minute, but I have some gripes with that. But yeah, we're getting the Suramar raid, which is Nighthold. And then after that, we don't know what's there, but we know a few months later we're getting more content. So if they can keep that up, this will be by far the best expansion that WoW has ever had. And that should be that should be the case, because they've had this game out for so long that you think that their iteration on everything would be so polished that they could just push a ton of content out, a ton of really good content out very quickly. And their team is huge enough for that as well. And maybe it's not raids, maybe it's just more dungeons and stuff, which they have promised that, yeah, Karazhan is a step in that direction, but we're going to get more. And that makes me really excited, because if they just keep giving me more of what I already enjoy about this expansion for a while, then I'm going to be very content with that. I'm going to keep playing. In fact, I've used all this gold that I've been farming to just buy a ton of the WoW tokens, and I'm subscribed until the end of December. So at least until the end of December, I'll be playing. We'll see how that ends up happening, and whether or not the the dungeons are any good, like Karazhan or Nighthold is any good. We'll see. but I'm looking forward to it, and I'm having a lot of fun. So I would say, yeah, a month into the launch of the game, so far it is looking to be very promising. So if you've been waiting to pick up WoW or the expansion at all, you know, maybe it's your first time playing the game, that's fine. Don't feel like overwhelmed by it, because there's actually there's a surprising amount of new players playing at the moment. But, you know, outside of that, if you're just looking to pick up the expansion and you've played WoW before, I think this is the time. I think we all are kind of coming out of this process going, yeah, this game is actually pretty good. It's worth it. This is so far their best expansion. Let's hope they can keep up the release schedule for this content, because that will make it a lot more worth it. So now I want to kind of gripe on what I don't like about the expansion, because that was 26 minutes of me saying that I do like it. What don't I like after playing the game for a month? I think the biggest thing is Suramar. I like the zone. I think the zone is cool, and I like the story the zone is trying to tell. I don't like the execution of all of that. So basically, you have like this outside, like foresty area as a part of the zone Suramar, and what's happening there is people, these like elves, they have been kicked out of their city, and this was like the original elf city. So if you know the story of Warcraft, in the War of the Ancients, there was this well of I think it was called the Well of Eternity. I don't remember exactly the name of it, but it was the well of all this like mystical power of the elves, and they essentially through Sargeras coming to Azeroth and like attacking, they had to use the well to try to destroy the Burning Legion, and sure, it defended Azeroth for the time being, and then the War of the Ancients happened, and it was this really cool like introductory to the planet that we've never seen outside of books or like random lore bits. It was like the history of the game. Actually, I should say the history of the franchise. And now we're in the zone, the Broken Isles, that a lot of that stuff was taking place in. And, you know, you look at the city of Suramar itself, and the Nightfallen, which are the elves that were kicked out, and the elves inside there have basically kicked these people out because they need this well to sustain themselves, and when they don't have that well to sustain themselves, they get like all weird and drug addict-y, and they go on like withdrawals, and the whole story is like trying to get those Nightfallen in a place where they're not turning into withered husks at the end of the day. And it is a cool story. But when you go into the city of Suramar, there is a mechanic where you put on this disguise, and for the first few times you're using it, especially as a demon hunter, it's a lot of fun, because like this is a full-on city they've built in the like this zone. Think like Orgrimmar, except double the size of it. It's a big area, and it's actually the first thing in the game that has actually ever felt like a city. You're going around and there's like children and NPCs, and like it's cool. It feels like a city. It's well decorated too. But with this mechanic of having this disguise on, you're sneaking around. Most people don't care about your disguise. They're like, oh, look, it's an elf. And then they have these things on the roof where you can like grapple up to the roof, and you can get away from maybe people who detect you that way. Or you could just kind of like get a bearing on certain areas of the zone. And in fact, in the case of being a demon hunter, you feel a lot like Batman, because you're just like brooding on the edge of these buildings, and you're like looking down with your wings, and it's really cool. And then the reality hits after about a week or two of doing this, that there are these mobs that can detect you, and they can detect you from a pretty significant distance away. Just under the range of normal ranged abilities from like mages and stuff. And you have only but a couple seconds to get out of their range, or else your disguise drops, and then all hell is unleashed upon you as everything in the city will aggro as you try to get away because there is no safe spot to run. There are a few like little baskets you can jump into to hide, but in the more densely populated parts of that city, there's just mobs. There is like hundreds of mobs in like a tiny little area, and if you get detected and you pull a couple of them, you're gonna die, or you're gonna have to get really clever being a demon hunter to like jump up on an area that's gonna make them all freak out and bug out and evade and then go back to their spots because they can't reach you, because pathfinding is really interesting in Warcraft. So it's so frustrating. And it is by far my least favorite part of this expansion, is doing those quests. And the worst part is there's content locked behind that faction, the Nightfallen. There's 2 dungeons, the Mythic dungeons, only Mythic, that are locked behind that. So you have to do the quest in order to unlock those. And then part of the ability to fly in the Broken Isles down the line is to do a quest, or to do all of their quests, which involve like, rep grinding. And that's not fun because you have to do these freaking world quests in the zone that are all a part of, having to go into the city and freaking sneak around, but get detected all of the time. If they just, once you hit honored or even revered, like maximum with this faction, if they just made it so your disguise doesn't fall off and you can't be detected, that would be perfect. That would actually fix all of my problems I have with the zone. But so far, there are no plans to do that, and you have to sneak around and do it on every character that you want to actually play. Otherwise, the rep does not, cross over between your characters, and neither do the rewards, and neither does the content unlock, which is so frustrating. It needs to be behind some kind of achievement or something, so that way you don't have to do it on every single character, because it is not fun. And there have been several times while doing it that I just wanted to quit, just stop playing. And in fact, I did. If I get frustrated with the Nightfall and stuff, I literally just turn off the game and don't come back to it until someone else is online. Even though I'm having fun with the rest of the game, it's that one part of the game that has been the most frustrating thing, and they need to fix it. And I hope that they do, because it is an easy fix, and that's why it's frustrating to me, is they can easily fix it and make it better, and they haven't yet. But I understand why. They have other fish to crack at the moment. Or fish nuts to crack? I don't know. What's the saying? They need to work on class balance, which is what they're doing now. They made a pass. We'll see how that ends up going after this week. But there were some classes massively underperforming as far as damage and tanking and healing. And we'll see how their balance patch actually works out. I trust them. They've been doing this for a while now. We'll see how they can, balance things up, adjust things to be close enough that it's not, super crazy where you actually you're required to bring certain classes because they just pull so much damage than others. And yeah, we'll see how all that goes. But let me know what you guys think of the expansion now that we're a month in. How are you guys feeling? Are you guys having fun? Have you done Emerald Nightmare? Have you done Mythic Plus? Let me know all these things. Are you just focusing on PvP? Because let's be honest, PvPers got kind of shafted. There are no new battlegrounds at the moment. They didn't launch with any. There are no current announcements for any. So, PvPers, like I said, they got a little bit boned. But at the same time, what else could you do? There's like the season started for competitive stuff. And if that's what you want to do, you can easily do that kind of thing. But, if you're not interested in PvP, are you enjoying the game? I think that's a very interesting discussion to have. And it's one that I'm happy to start like discussing on a wider scale with, people, because I find this whole thing fascinating, where Blizzard has basically done this comeback story, and now they're back. They were up above their highest concurrent players ever, which is crazy because their highest concurrent players ever was absurd. And they don't talk about subscriber numbers anymore, but they have made it very clear that the game is doing extraordinarily well, because the good word coming out that the expansion is good, people are interested in the content there. Demon hunters are cool because people like Illidan. And yeah, it's just like there's a lot of positive vibes around the game at the moment. And I find that refreshing, especially in a world where we're getting a lot of negativity around games, such as like No Man's Sky, which is a game that I actually enjoyed for the time that I played it. Yeah, let me know what you think of Legion. Are you enjoying it after a month? Are you not? I don't know. We shall see in 2 months' time, or a couple months after that, once we get the next raid and everything, how people are enjoying it. But with that being said, we shall see you guys next time.